As the start time approached, I pondered whether she was running late again. I glanced at the vacant chair, and my colleagues mirrored my frustration. Eventually, the rightful occupant arrived, an hour after our business had commenced. "My name is Casey," she introduced herself. "I'm a 48-year-old office worker. I live with my husband Scott and our 2 kids who are now in high school and middle school, so they're quite independent. This allows me to focus on my job." Scott recently started a business with some friends, and although it's challenging, he seems happier than before, Casey continued. "I've been working in accounting at this small to mid-sized company for quite some time. I get along well with the part-time staff, but I'm having issues with a newer employee named Frances. She's 24, half my age, and the daughter of our managing director." Casey sighed. "She's clearly here due to nepotism. Initially, I didn't mind. Small companies have these things happen. But Frances, she's something else." After one of our part-timers left, leaving me mostly on my own, Frances was assigned to accounting. I heard she had some qualifications, so I hoped she'd lighten my load. Turns out, I was wrong, Casey admitted with a hint of frustration in her voice. From our first meeting, things felt off. When I greeted her, she casually replied, "Sure, nice to meet you, Aunt." I was flabbergasted, Casey recalled. Not only was her attention elsewhere, but she had the audacity to call me Aunt upon our first meeting. The managing director just watched with a smile, seemingly unconcerned. "If my kids behaved like that, I'd tell them. Don't be rude. Are things just different nowadays?" Casey wondered aloud. "I've never been fond of our managing director personally. We only converse when necessary. I didn't realize he was so indulgent with his daughter. He probably thinks she can do no wrong." Confronting Frances would only upset him, so I've held my tongue, Casey admitted, though inwardly sighing. "I know it's my duty to train her." So, I continued explaining the tasks, but Frances wouldn't listen. "I can't remember all these things at once," she said dismissively, not even bothering to listen, Casey recounted with a hint of resignation. I restrained my irritation and asked her about her so-called qualifications. "I thought you had some kind of certification," I asked tentatively. "What is it?" I thought maybe I could assign her work based on that. "I'm an accounting clerk," came her flat reply. "I went to vocational high school and got the certification." Almost involuntarily, she added, "I tried and failed multiple times to become an accounting technician." I struggled with my reservations. Is it really okay to have someone like that in accounting? Despite my misgivings, I did my best to train her while juggling my own workload. A month after Frances joined, her attitude remained unchanged, and she still couldn't perform her job properly. I patiently reiterated the same instructions, but she seemed disinterested in remembering, not even bothering to take notes. Other staff members also voiced their frustrations about Frances' inability to complete assigned tasks. It was particularly irksome that she earned the same salary as me despite my years of service. Another month passed, and Frances showed little to no improvement. One day, she didn't show up at the start time. Concerned, I called her mobile, but it went unanswered. With the managing director out meeting clients, everyone in the office was anxious. An hour later, Frances strolled in as if nothing had happened. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to mask my frustration. "Looks like it," she replied casually. "I'd overslept. What kind of professional does that?" I scolded Frances sternly. "If you're going to be late, you should at least inform the office." "Okay," she replied nonchalantly. From then on, Frances started arriving late more frequently. Despite supposedly living with her family, she often spent nights out, a fact even the managing director was unaware of. There were instances when she arrived late even when the managing director was present, to which he would merely comment, "Oh, you're late today," leaving everyone else bewildered. The stress of dealing with Frances continued to mount in various ways until the incident occurred. Is she late again? Even the managing director was unaware that she had spent another night away, allegedly at her lover's place. The start time passed with no sign of her. I called her mobile again, but as expected, there was no answer. At this point, should we just ignore her? My colleague, Dina, asked, clearly frustrated. Finally, Frances arrived, more than an hour late. She sat down at her desk without a greeting and began applying makeup as if nothing had happened. Everyone was stunned, but she appeared unconcerned. "Frances, this really isn't okay." I finally spoke up. She looked at me, puzzled. "You come in late with no greeting and start doing your makeup. I've told you before to call if you're going to be late. Remember? It's like they don't seem to know what's wrong." I muttered to myself, feeling absurd having to lecture a 24-year-old adult like a child. Frances sulked. displaying a childlike attitude. "Isn't it common courtesy to apologize when you're late?" I added, exasperated. At that moment, the managing director stormed over to me, his face twisted in anger. "You insolent brat, who do you think you are? You're fired." I almost blurted out, "What?" but managed to hold my tongue. Nervous glances darted around the room. Of course, the president is conveniently absent, I thought to myself. Well, the president's not really reliable to begin with. Frustrated with the managing director's actions, my colleague, Dina, spoke up. "Wait a minute, Casey hasn't said anything wrong here," she asserted. Dina worked in sales and detested injustices. She had a strong sense of right and wrong. We'd been close friends for years, supporting each other at work. The others in the room nodded in agreement with Dina's words, but the managing director did not. "You're talking back to me. You're fired too," he bellowed at Dina. Unable to hold back any longer, I glared at the managing director. "Are you serious about this?" Dina joined in, glaring at him as well. He declared both of us fired and ordered us to leave immediately. At that moment, the president returned, looking puzzled. Apparently, the president and the managing director were relatives, and for some undisclosed reason, the president couldn't oppose him. Fed up, Dina and I packed our belongings and left. We stopped at a cafe to catch our breath. "What's his problem?" Dina asked, still fuming. I was getting tired of the job, but I didn't think I'd have to quit like this. "I feel bad that you got fired because of me," I admitted. That was my biggest concern. "It's okay," Dina reassured me. I was tired of working full-time anyway. "Maybe this is a chance to find a part-time job." "What about you, Casey?" she asked. I'd actually been offered a part-time accounting position at Scott's company. Dina thought that sounded like a better option. "Both the managing director and Francis really ticked me off," she added, still angry. I agreed with her. "I wonder if the company will be alright without us," I mused, reflecting briefly. "Not that it's any of our business now." I said that, and finally Dina smiled. "Exactly. Even if they beg us to come back, I won't. I feel like suing them for wrongful termination." We decided to take some time to cool off and discuss our next steps. When I got home and shared what had happened with Scott, he was even angrier than I was. "What's up with that managing director?" Scott fumed. His reaction reassured me that I had made the right decision, despite my initial doubts. Scott's comforting words put me at ease. I started working in accounting at Scott's company. The part-time accountants who were already there told me they felt more comfortable with their workload lightened. Dina also began working part-time at Scott's company. We hadn't been able to complete the paperwork for leaving the company since we were fired on the spot and had to pack up immediately. Someone, likely my successor Francis, would handle it. We threw ourselves into our new roles energetically. After some time, I received a call from the managing director of my previous company. "We don't understand the accounting you were handling. Come to the office immediately," he demanded. What's he talking about? I wondered aloud. Could it be they're failing at the monthly payments to clients and sales calculations that I used to handle? Besides, we haven't even received our exit paperwork yet, but we were fired just for being late. Who do they think they're talking to? Needless to say, I declined. "No can do," I replied firmly. But the managing director persisted. "Come right now, and we'll rehire you. You haven't found another job yet, have you?" I sighed. "No thanks. I've already switched jobs. I've taught Frances everything about accounting. Not sure if she gets it though," I remarked before hanging up. Apparently, Dina had also been contacted. Several clients insisted they'd cease business if Dina wasn't managing their accounts. The managing director arrogantly offered her re-employment as well, underestimating her capabilities as just a female salesperson. It turned out Dina was a valuable asset to the company, fueling our anger towards the managing director once again. Meanwhile, my phone kept ringing incessantly with calls from the previous company, reaching over 100 in just a few days. Even when I answered, assuming I had completed the necessary resignation paperwork, I was simply urged to return quickly for rehiring. "We've had enough," frustrated Dina, and I decided to confront the previous company and give them a piece of our minds. Upon seeing us, the managing director said, "Ah, you finally came back. You should have returned obediently from the start." "We haven't returned to be rehired. We're here to confront you," I replied calmly. "You shouldn't have any problems if Frances is handling the accounting, right? I taught her everything. If she can't do it, that's on her. As both a parent and a boss, you're failing if you haven't noticed her poor behavior." The managing director's face flushed red with anger. "How dare you? I'd even offered to rehire you. That's precisely why we don't want to be rehired. In fact, we were considering quitting anyway, I continued, undeterred by his shock. And has Frances started acting like a responsible adult yet? Dina interjected. While I don't deny nepotism, at least have her work properly. The way she talks, the attitude when she listens, everything about her is unprofessional. Shouldn't you, as her parent, be the one to address these issues? And you fired us just because we pointed that out. It doesn't make sense, to be honest. I couldn't care less about being fired. It was clear things would go downhill if Frances was the only one left in accounting, I stated bluntly. The managing director glared at me. Plus, firing Dina, who's a stellar salesperson, shows you really don't know what you're doing. No wonder you're losing clients. How many have you lost in the last month? I added, a grin spreading across my face as the managing director's face turned beet red. I came here today to discuss our wrongful termination. We need you to provide the necessary documents. Also, I wanted to see firsthand how much trouble you're in without us, I continued, not giving him a chance to respond. Dina chimed in after me. I've already consulted a lawyer about the wrongful termination. We're willing to consider a settlement if it spares us all the hassle. What will it be? The managing director burst out. What wrongful termination? You were fired on the spot for bringing up issues with an employee's behavior. This is clearly wrongful termination, I asserted firmly, locking eyes with the visibly pale president. Mr. President, this is your company, isn't it? Your relationship with the managing director has nothing to do with us. Getting more than 100 phone calls is crazy, don't you think? You fire us, and now you want us back because you're in a jam. Who do you think would even listen to that? The president could only manage to look paler, unable to say a word. Mr. President, you've done accounting work before, right? I trust you'll handle the rest. Dina concluded. Dina and I decided there was no point in further discussion and turned to leave. We'll leave the rest to our lawyer, I remarked firmly. After some time, we received a request for a settlement through a lawyer, and we agreed. We were recognized as victims of wrongful termination and received our unpaid wages, severance pay, and a settlement amount higher than the market rate. We were pleased. It felt like we had finally had our revenge on the company. Both Dina and I would sometimes receive urgent calls from clients while we were out, as we had given them our personal numbers after we abruptly left. Some even called to check up on us. I explained the situation and that we had been wrongfully terminated. Word spread quickly in our tight-knit industry. Most of Dina's clients left once she quit, likely cutting the company's business in half. According to a former colleague, staff kept leaving the company. They were getting complaints from clients, and the president and managing director were overwhelmed trying to keep things running. Frances couldn't manage, so the wife of the former accounting president had to step in. She was a stern person, and Frances was reportedly having a hard time, crying every day. 6 months later, the company apparently went bankrupt. I reflected, it might be a good thing they lasted half a year. One day, I concluded, leaving the story open-ended. I spotted someone who looked remarkably like the managing director at a supermarket near the station. I couldn't resist staring. There he was, dressed in the supermarket's uniform, getting an earful from a young man who appeared to be the store manager. It seemed he was working part-time at the supermarket because he couldn't secure another job. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of the once haughty managing director now being scolded by someone younger. Our eyes met briefly from a distance, and I gave him a nod, which he predictably ignored. Since I frequented that supermarket, I made it a habit to look out for him. He was often caught in the midst of being reprimanded for something. I had thought he was competent, but Dina later informed me that he often took credit for his subordinates' work. Speaking of which, when I mentioned the supermarket to Dina, she started going there out of curiosity and eventually became a regular customer. In a way, the managing director's presence was contributing to the supermarket's revenue, so maybe he did have some competence after all, though he was always getting yelled at. Dina and I continued to work happily at Scott's company. Scott even expressed relief, noting that our efforts had boosted the company's sales. We both looked forward to Scott treating us to dinner for our upcoming birthdays.